Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to bring a focus on climate change to my talk this afternoon, and I'm going to bring it from a lens you may not have heard from, and that's the lens of sociology, psychology, organizational studies. In the old adage of how you're supposed to give a talk, where I'm supposed to tell you what I'm going to tell you, then I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you what I told you, I'm going to do that in my talk too. So I will begin and end with a story, a vignette, to try and drive the point home of what I'm trying to get across to you this afternoon. In the middle, I'll give you the guts of what's in the book. The book is actually designed to be read by regular people. It is only 100 pages with 20 pages of citations. And if you think that's easy, think again. The editor kept making shorter, make it shorter. And that was my challenge, is to get this point across in a form that people would actually read. You know, we as academics are rewarded for writing big tomes that if you drop them on the table, they pass what we call the thunk test. They make a really loud sound. This book doesn't do that. This book is actually meant to be consumed. And in that, for that matter, it's also priced very reasonably. It makes a great stocking stuffer for Christmas, if you're thinking. Let me begin with a story to try and set up what I'm going to talk about today. And it's a story that happened to me, and it happened to me here at the University of Michigan 5 years ago. I was called by the development office. They said, we have a potential donor. He's worth a lot of money, and he's interested in business sustainability, what I study. And would I meet with him to possibly get him to give a gift? The only time I had free was at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I met him over at the business school in one of the conference rooms. I showed up 7 o'clock in the morning, cradling my cup of coffee, still trying to wake up. I entered the room, and there's a conference table. The potential donor sitting across from me, the development officer's to my right. I sit down, and the potential donor starts the conversation by saying, I think the scientific review process is corrupt. His exact words. And that kind of woke me up. And I said, well, what do you think of a university based on the system? He says, I think that university is corrupt as well. He went on to say that he thought climate change was a hoax. We started to discuss solar flares and sunspots, and we kicked that around for a while. And then he turned his sights on me, and he said, now why do you hate capitalism, and why do you want to destroy the market by teaching environmental issues in a business school? So we kicked that around for a little while. And then he said, now do you know why Earth Day is on the day it's on? And at this point I've become pretty punchy, so I said, why don't you tell me? Why is Earth Day on the day it's on? And he said, because that's Karl Marx's birthday. I turned to the development officer and I said, what's our agenda here this morning? And the potential donor jumped in and said, I want to buy you a ticket to the Heartland Conference, which, if you're not familiar, is the #1 climate skeptics conference in the world. I did a quick calculation of my calendar in my head. I found a conflict. I declined the invitation. The meeting ended, and I was furious. I felt that this person had done a bait and switch. I felt that he was, let's face it, I felt he was crazy. And then through the day, as I talked to more and more people, and I thought about it more and more, my anger turned to fascination. Because the more I thought about it, everything he said hung together. Everything he said represented a consistent worldview. It was not a worldview I shared, but it was a worldview nonetheless. And if I could understand that worldview, I could understand where he was coming from, perhaps understand where people who reject the science of climate change come from. And that's when I set about to start to look at this. Because what he had done was come to the University of Michigan specifically to talk to me, to invite me to the Heartland Conference. He came to evangelize me. And then we start to look at it that way. You start to look at this as a cultural issue. And that's what I study. And that's when I started to get excited. And that's when I started to do research on this and start to write about it, develop a string of work culminating in this book here that tries to bring everything together that I could find and I have done on why do people reject the science of climate change, the sociology and psychology of why people reject the science of climate change. I'm going to give you the punchline right now. And the punchline is this, that in the public debate, and the political debate for that matter, on climate change in this country right now, the topic is not CO2, it is not climate models, it is conflicting worldviews and people defending values that they hold dear. And when you see it in that light, the next logical step is, if you try and convince these people with more data, they will dig their heels in even harder and resist what you're saying. And that's important for you as you find yourself across the dinner table at Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever holiday gathering you have, and that brother or sister, aunt or uncle, niece or nephew says climate change is a hoax? And what do? What do we do? Well, we whip out our PowerPoint deck and we start to educate them on the science, not realizing that that is actually counterproductive, that that is getting in the way of communicating with this person over what they're actually talking about. There's the punchline. You can now finish your meal, you can check out, you can start checking your email. That's the thrust of the book. Let me go through the details of it to try and convince you that that is true, and then again I'll end on another vignette, and then I'll take questions. Let's start to set this up, and I want to focus on two divergent trends. I'm going to look at this as someone who studies cultures, someone who studies norms and beliefs. And the first trend takes place in the sciences, and we have the IPCC coming out with increasingly stern statements about climate change and its impact on our world. And you can see here the 2013, 2014 statements that warming of the climate system is unequivocal. Off it goes. Here's the beginning of this trend. Next, nearly 200 scientific agencies around the world, including every one of the G8 plus 5 countries, endorse the IPCC statement. Let's go further. If you do surveys of practicing climate scientists, and this is important, practicing climate scientists, not when the Wall Street Journal published a letter signed by 15 scientists saying that the science on climate change wasn't settled. It was signed by a marketing professor from Wharton, the research and development director at ExxonMobil. These are practicing climate scientists, and you can see the numbers up there in red from the mid-80s up into the 90s say, yep, folks, this is happening. We are doing it. If you look at the literature, 97.1% of the papers between 1991 and 2011 that look at the issue of climate change endorse the IPCC statement. In fact, the science is so compelling that the National Academies of Sciences and the AAAS both use the word consensus to describe the state of science on climate change. There's trend number one. Trend number two. Belief in the science of climate change declined from 71 to 57% among Americans between 2008 and 2009. Right now it sits around 2/3. 2/3 of Americans think that climate change is real. And even more amazingly, belief that most scientists think global warming is happening declined from 47 down to 39% among Americans between 2008 and 2011. A significant number of Americans don't believe that climate change is real, and a majority of Americans don't think that scientists think it's real. I don't care where you stand on this issue, sociologically, that's fascinating. What in the world is going on here? How can we understand that? That's sort of the motivating question to get me started on this inquiry. And we could be talking about many different topics. Right now we're living in a very interesting time where science is being challenged. I think the academy is facing a crisis of relevance in our society today. There's an anti-intellectualism that's spreading. What I'm going to talk about, I could be talking about climate change. I could be talking about autism and vaccines. I could be talking about GMOs, nuclear power, gun control. I can go down the list of issues that have become fodder for the culture wars. And this is a study by the Pew Research Center showing the difference between AAAS scientists and the American public on a whole host of issues. And you can see these gaps where science says something and many people don't agree with it. And there's an issue of science communication that can come from that, but we want to understand why are they not hearing the message. So I want to start to think about the issue of climate change as a cultural issue. And to do that, I want to identify two variables, two concepts for your consideration. The first is a scientific consensus. The second is a social consensus. And they're two very different realities that come about through very different processes involving very different populations. On the left, a scientific consensus is formed by scientists. They use journals and conferences. They use accepted methodologies and peer review to come to a conclusion that this is the state of the science. A social consensus involves a much wider array of characters. Whether you like it or not, in the debate over climate change, in the social arena, radio pundits matter, sports figures matter, movie stars matter, the priest down the street matters, what happens in your town hall matters. Everyone is part of the debate, and not all of them use scientific reasoning to come to their conclusion. This is a very emotional debate, and that is a big part of what's going on here. It takes a while to go from the left to the right. And we've really been only at the climate change debate for about 20 years, beginning around 1997, coming to the present. And so as an analogy, think about the debate over cigarettes and cancer. For decades, scientists said that cigarettes cause cancer. For decades, the American public rejected that belief. In fact, for decades, Americans thought that cigarettes were good for you. And you can see ads. These are ads from the 1950s and 60s. And if you can read it over here on the left, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. In the center, your dentist would recommend you smoke Viceroys. Or over here, scientists and educators prefer to smoke with Kent and micronite filters. Cigarettes are good for you. They're not bad for you. This is crazy. But over time, we have reached a social consensus that cigarettes are bad for you. How do we know that? You know you have a social consensus when people feel safe saying this is true in a public audience to people they don't know. I'm willing to bet that any one of you, if you sat down for lunch with your son or daughter and they took out a pack of cigarettes and lit one up, you'd have a conversation with them over whether that's really a good idea. I'm even willing to bet that if your son or daughter brought a friend who did the exact same thing, a friend you'd never met before, and lit up a cigarette, you might actually say the exact same thing. That's how you know you have a social consensus, because it's an accepted way to see the world around us. How do you know we don't have a social consensus on climate change? It's because people don't want to bring it up in polite company. 2/3 of Americans rarely, if ever, discuss global warming with family or friends, according to a study by Yale. It has joined sex, politics, and religion as topics you don't bring up in polite company. It became, in this last election, as powerful a wedge issue as abortion. That's quite shocking and quite startling and quite interesting. How did this come about? Let's begin by breaking out how people stand on the issue. It is actually not a binary split. Climate change is a hoax, climate change is real. People follow along a spectrum on this. And this is a study that's done by Yale University. They do it twice a year. It's called the Six Americas Study. And they divide people into 6 segments on their belief in climate change. On the left, we have the alarmed. They're very concerned. They're very afraid. This is very serious. Something really bad is going to happen. On the right, we have the dismissive. This is a hoax. This is a joke. Why are we paying attention to it? And in the middle, we have shades of gray of people's positions on this issue. What demographic variables line up with people's position on this chart? Well, on environmental issues in general, the demographic variables are these. It's women more than men care about the environment. It's urban more than rural. It's the coasts more than the middle. It's affluent more than less so. It's educated more than less so. And it's liberals and Democrats more than conservatives and Republicans. On climate change, all those variables go away except for political party affiliation. The number one correlate to someone's belief on climate change aligns with their political affiliation, Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative. Here's some work that's very interesting by Riley Dunlap and Aaron McCreight. And I direct your attention to the chart on the bottom. The one on the top says the same thing, but this is, the blue line is Democrat, the red line is Republican. The time scale is 2001 to 2010. And you can see among Republicans a decreasing belief in climate change, among Democrats an increasing belief in climate change over that 10-year period. And in fact, if you were to draw that graph, and the surveys are there, and keep going to the left, those two lines meet in 1997. Why is 97 important? That's the year the Kyoto Treaty was signed. That's the year that an issue that was debated primarily in scientific circles now took on a gravity that impacted powerful economic and political interests, and it got thrown into the public debate in ways that scientists were totally unprepared for. The metaphor many have used is that scientists were like the Boy Scouts going against the Marines. They were totally flat-footed at the blowback that occurred around the issue of climate change. This trend continues, although encouragingly around 2009, it starts to tick back up, and just over 50% of Republicans right now believe that climate change is real. Upwards of 90% of Democrats believe that climate change is real. There, to me, is the smoking gun that this is a cultural issue. Are Democrats and Republicans taught about science in any different way? No. Do they look at it through a particular filter, worldview, or lens that gets them to see something different? Yes. How can we understand that worldview or lens? That is the focus here. Let me break it out into 4 bullet points to make it as painless as possible. So the social psychology that's in the book. And the first is, we all use cognitive filters. We all look at things through a lens. All of us. Interestingly, on whether climate change is real, Republicans are more opposed to the science. On whether GMOs are safe to eat, just that discrete question, Democrats are more opposed to the science. We all do it. We all have a lens, and it's backed up by a worldview we bring to the table. Because we will readily accept something if it supports our worldview, we will resist or reject it if it challenges our worldview. And climate change challenges, in many ways, many aspects, and I'll get into it, a conservative worldview. And we are driven by what's called motivated reasoning. I will approach things. Jonathan Haidt talks about this. When we approach an issue that we don't understand well, and that's important because a lot of people in this room really know climate science. And so their position on this issue is grounded in the science. But those who don't are driven by motivated reasoning. They want to reach a conclusion that confirms their worldview. And that's really important. And we do it in all aspects of our life. I'm driving my car, and I develop a rattle in the front right quarter. What's my first thought? It's a stone in the wheel. What's my next thought? It must be just a loose bolt. What is happening? I am trying to avoid the conclusion that I need to bring the car to a mechanic. I am not approaching it as a scientist. I'm approaching it as a lawyer. I had a very quick emotional reaction. Our emotions will kick in really, really fast. And then our reason comes in a distant second, trying to confirm what our emotions told us in the first place. A lot of us do this. And we need to recognize that we all do it, but that's at play at this debate as well. Where do those filters come from? Well, they come from the groups we associate with. They come from our tribes. They come from the identities that we possess. And so if you hang out with people of a certain worldview, you want to become connected with those people, and over time you will start to adopt the worldviews that they have in order to feel part of the community. I warn students about this often, that they can go into a company, and if the values don't fit yours, you can think yourself the supreme individual. You are not. Over time, that organization will have its way. I have a brother. I love him dearly. I watched him move from Michigan to Texas. I watched his politics start to swing to the right. Who do you see as a trusted news source? Very provocative question right now. I can offer 2 names. One may make your stomach twist, one may not, and I could do it to any audience because it will be either way. Fox News, National Public Radio. Surveys show increasing listenership of Fox News, decreasing belief in climate change. Increasing listenership of NPR, increasing belief in climate change. Who's a spokesperson you trust? I'll do it to you again. Rush Limbaugh, Al Gore. These people are representative of a tribe, of a worldview that you may possess, and therefore you will trust what they say. Our social media is doing it to us. We're creating filter bubbles around ourselves. I guarantee that those you follow on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn have worldviews that are similar to yours. And they reinforce your worldview, and that is a major issue in our politics today. There's a really nice study done by someone at the University of Indiana a couple of years ago. They got their hands on 500,000 tweets. I got to put this image in this slide deck. It's a startling image. They got 500,000 tweets before the midterm elections. They ran an algorithm to code them liberal or conservative, and then they looked at who retweets who. And 2 very clear clusters form. One is a liberal conversation, one's the conservative conversation with very few ties in between them. It's a visual representation of the filter bubbles we create through what's called cultural cognition, connecting with those around us. Over time, once a position fits with our cultural identity, then scientific reasoning starts to move to the side because it becomes challenging to start to analyze something that requires effort to think outside the belief systems I have. I could ask this room, how many people have read all the IPCC reports? And Henry, you can't answer that question. I guarantee that in most audiences, the answer is very few. Where did you get your position? Well, the pastor down the street says that this isn't real, so I trust him. Listen to any show on Rush Limbaugh. He'll say it's a joke. Okay, I'll trust Rush. You go down the list. Who do you trust for information? And you will go the easy route, and that's normal. We all do it. We are what's called boundedly rational. We're not totally rational beings, as much as economists would like to say we do, although Herbert Simon won a Nobel Prize by saying we're boundedly rational. We have a limited capacity to gather information, we have a limited capacity to process it, and we look for shortcuts. So psychologists like to say we're cognitive misers. We don't like to expend cognitive energy unnecessarily. We like to keep things simple. So for example, I remember vividly the first time I went to an organic food store. And I got to the cereal aisle, and I saw a wall of cereals that I'd never seen before. And what was previously an easy automatic decision, I walk up, I grab my Cheerios, I walk down the aisle, and I'm on my way, required me to stop and think, and it annoyed me. And we all do this. In fact, Max Weber, a sociologist from the turn of the century, pointed out that we have to do this in the modern world. We live our lives by what he said, activating black boxes. I get up in the morning, I turn on my car. I have no idea how the engine works. It gets me where I need to go. I go to the doctor. The doctor says I need a new hip. He did. I did some looking on what's involved in hip replacement. I stopped looking. I don't want to know. I want to keep that black box closed, and I'm going to trust the doctor. I go to the airport. I don't know how TSA works. I don't know how jet engine works. I don't know how air traffic control works. It gets me where I want to go. If you had to open up every single black box that you encounter during your day, you'd become an emotional cripple. If you couldn't eat that food without knowing where it came from, whether it was sustainable, whether the farmers were paid a fair wage, none of you would be eating right now. And if you couldn't buy the clothes you were wearing until you knew how it was made and fair wages and all that kind of stuff, you'd have a very limited wardrobe. That's how we live our lives. We are cognitive misers. We are boundedly rational. Finally, and it's important, our political economy creates inertia for change, and change threatens powerful economic and political interests. And they're at play in this debate. And they're major forces, whether it's the conservative right think tanks or fossil fuel interests or others that are opposed to the shift that's before us, they will muddy the debate. But all of this leads up to the final conclusion that once our minds are made up and our position aligns with our cultural identity, being a Republican means I don't believe in climate change. Being a Southerner means whatever the connection is, trying to break that link becomes extremely difficult. And presenting someone with more scientific information is coded from the other side as saying, I've seen this information. I don't trust it. This person thinks I'm an idiot. So what do? You give them more scientific information. What do they hear on the other side? This person really thinks I'm an idiot. And the heels start digging in, and the conversation starts to degenerate, and you don't know why. The issue is around communication, and the issue is around overcoming distrust. So let me give you 4 forms of distrust that animate this debate. I'll wrap up with my final story, and then we'll go to questions. I think we're good on time. What's the first form of distrust on the climate change debate? It's distrust of the messengers. Who are the 3 primary spokesmen on the issue of climate change? Well, it's environmentalists, democratic politicians, and scientists. And there are people in this country that distrust 1, 2, or all 3 of those constituents. Those quotes up there in blue actually come from the Heartland Conference. When I told my doctoral student that I couldn't go, she lit up and she said, I'll go. And so she went, a sociology student, and she interviewed people, she listened to speeches. Our potential donor escorted her around, trying to get her to first divulge her position. She was wise enough to say, I don't know where I stand on the issue, and then remain agnostic as much as she could. And then we worked on a paper together of what are the cultural frames that are used at the Heartland Conference to convey climate science. And these quotes actually come from it. So, environmentalists. There are a lot of people in this country that think environmentalists are socialist, borderline communist. They want to use the state to exert their will over you and restrict your freedom. They're pagan at the core. They do not trust them. And so those quotes, AGW believers, that's anthropogenic global warming believers, they hate people, they hate the Western economy. They want to de-develop the world. They want to slow us down. They want us all to live in caves and drive Priuses or whatever. The environmental agenda seeks to use the state to create scarcity as a means to exert their will and the state's authority over your lives. It's a threat to your freedom. There's a phraseology for environmentalists. They're watermelons. They're green on the outside. They're red on the inside. They're communists. Okay, there's spokesperson number 1. Spokes number 2, I don't even know if I need to go into that. Democratic politicians. A lot of people in this country don't trust Democratic politicians. The one they love to hate the most is Al Gore. He fabricated this issue in order to make himself rich. And then the third is scientists, and this is a fascinating one. And if you've never read the book, I encourage you to read the book that won the Pulitzer Prize in 1964. It's called Anti-Intellectualism in American Life. And what the author was pointing out then is more true today, that this community of our colleagues, we in academia, are not trusted. We live in an ivory tower. We study issues that they don't understand. We use a language they can't comprehend. And, at least they think, we have a disproportionate influence on the political process. I don't trust them. They're anti-democratic. And so that becomes a problem. And so what do we do about this? Well, we find other spokespeople. We need climate brokers. People need to hear it from people that they trust, that are part of their tribe, their community. So we need more evangelicals talking about climate change. We need Republicans who are actually sitting in office. We have a lot of Republicans starting to come forward, but they're past politicians sitting in office saying this is real. I want the farmer to hear it from farmers down the street or in the town hall. I want them to hear it from the Kiwanis Club. We need people to hear it from people they trust. And when you find yourself in a conversation with someone who says it's not real, do not invoke someone they don't trust. Chances are, do not invoke Al Gore. Don't invoke the EPA or the Environmental Defense Fund. But bring in brokers that they will trust. For example, last year, the CEO of Cargill issued a press release saying that climate change is real, we better do something about it. If we don't, we'll have food shortages in the short to medium term. That is a very different message coming from the CEO of one of the largest agricultural companies in the world than coming from the mouth of Al Gore. The Pope, coming out on this, calling it a moral issue, can do a far better job of convincing people that this with some religious authority than a professor from the University of Michigan. Spokespeople are coming forward, and invoke them in your conversations, and we need to get more of them to come forward, which means you should know your audience. I have a position that is between two schools, the School of Environment and the School of Business. And the joke is, there are 3 of us that have similar positions, and the joke is we go to the School of Environment, Natural Resources and Environment, and we're seen as capitalist sellouts, and then we go over to the business school and we're seen as a tree hugger. But you can flop that, because I actually know how to become multilingual. And I can go to the Sierra Club, put on jeans and a flannel shirt, and give a talk for them and talk about solar radiation and sunspots and solar flares and all the stuff that Henry has taught me. I can also put on the pinstripe suit and give a talk to the National Association of Manufacturers, any number of trade groups, businesses, and so forth. And I can speak their language. I gave a talk once to the Michigan Manufacturers Association, and before the talk started, a gentleman sat in the front row and he slapped a book on the table very loudly, very deliberately, title facing me, and the book was called The Climate Hoax. So I kind of knew what was going to happen. And in the middle of my talk, he interrupted. He said, "This is all nonsense because climate change is a hoax." What's my answer? I said, I don't care. You can be agnostic about the science of climate change and still see it as a business issue because it will change operational efficiency, consumer demand, cost of capital, regulatory compliance. Those are business issues. I don't care what the science says. What can he say? I put it in his language. I knew the audience. Understand your audience. Understand what works. I think we need more brokers from the market to say we can do this, we can solve this without destroying our way of life. And a lot of people, leaving aside the financial crisis, a lot of people still trust business on certain decisions. And one is that business doesn't do things that cost them money. So they will make smart business decisions. So if they're saying this is real, then there must be something behind it. And then we also need more brokers from the ideological right, and they're starting to come forward. There is a proposal right now from James Baker, George Shultz, Hank Paulson, for a carbon price. The conversation's already begun. They're not real Republicans. They're not real conservatives. They're not in office anymore. You start to attack the messenger, and that's starting to happen. I also think we need more academics who now know how to become multilingual. And so I just bring this up for your attention. The whole idea of the role of academics in public and political discourse, I think, is in flux. I think we are facing a crisis of relevance. I do think we need to work harder to bring our work out to the world, to occupy the place that I think we deserve to occupy, of informing policy decisions, business decisions. And I think we avoid that at our peril. Most of us don't see it as a job. I am not rewarded for doing it. I am not trained to do it. That's a problem. And I know President Schlissel has taken this issue up. This is a conference that we had last May. To give you a sense of how important this issue is, the opening panel was 4 university presidents: Michigan, Virginia, Dartmouth, and Arizona State. This is an issue that impacts us all across the entire academy. So I just bring that up as a little stump speech there. I can go off on a tangent if you like. What's the second form of distrust? Well, they distrust the process that created the message. First of all, they distrust the scientific process. As my potential donor started our conversation, he thinks the scientific review process is corrupt. And you can see up there, the problem of science goes back to World War II. They moved the peer review process to the PAL review process. First of all, the importance of World War II. After World War II, the federal government started funding science. And that's where a lot of people think that science got hijacked by political interests within the government. And we became just another special interest fighting for others. That has relevance today. This march in Washington for scientists, it's a tricky tightrope. Yes, we need to call out that science under attack. We can't be seen as just another special interest, just like every other special interest. And the coding already on the far right is it's going to be a bunch of welfare queens in lab coats. That's the exact expression that's being used there. Because we will only get published if we satisfy the political interests of editors. We will only get funded if we satisfy the political interests of funders. We are corrupt. In their view, that is the logic. And then secondly, they don't trust the United Nations. They don't trust the IPCC. That's a threat to our freedom. That's a threat to our sovereignty. There's certainly a real movement to get out of the UN, and that is part of it. So what do you do about this? Well, you begin where I began my talk. When someone challenges me on the science of climate change, I do not talk about sunspots and solar flares. I leave that aside. I focus on the consensus. 200 scientific agencies say this is real. Every one of the G8 plus 5. Surveys of scientists say this is real. The National Academy says there's a consensus. That's pretty good. That's good enough for me. And there is research to show once you get that across to people that there is a scientific consensus, they start to roll on the issue. I commend that to you. Put that away in the back of your head. If you find yourself in this debate, that's a much better way to go than their pet theory on what is really doing it or what is wrong with the science. Focus on the consensus. I have a really snarky comment that I will make if I get pushed. I'll say, you know what? I believe there's something called an atom. I believe it has a nucleus with electrons flying around it. I believe this body is made up of billions of these. I will never in my life see it. I will never be able to prove it exists. But science tells me it's so. I trust it. And I stop there. I could go through the others of ask the right scientific questions. You can start to pick at that. Don't just put all the questions into one. And then separate the problem from the solution. Someone says, I don't believe climate change is real because I don't want to see a carbon tax. Well, those are two separate issues. And it would be an honest conversation to say, yeah, it's real, but we can't afford to do something about it. That would be an honest debate. What's the third form of distrust? They distrust the message itself. And, I know the science goes here of showing Florida starting to get engulfed in water. People start to shut down when they hear catastrophic images. How many people saw that movie The Day After Tomorrow? Okay, easily one of the worst ways of communicating climate change. The idea of Manhattan underwater, glaciers moving down Madison Avenue, people shut down. People actually believe the world is a nice place. It's called a just world theory. I believe this talk will end. I believe that I will go back to my office. I will have dinner tonight, a Valentine's dinner. It's going to be wonderful. I will go to bed. I will wake up tomorrow. The sun will rise, and everything will be fine. And yet people are putting out scenarios and saying, no, there's catastrophe around the corner. And people start to shut down. There's a nice book by David King at Oxford on climate change. And my favorite part of it is 2 appendices in the back. The first one says, this is what climate skeptics say, and this is why they're wrong. The second one says, this is what climate alarmists say, and this is why they're wrong. And he calls it climate porn. It's exciting, it's titillating, it's meant to get us all worked up, and it's totally false. And a lot of the extreme statements on climate change tend to get people to shut down. That second one there is an important one. For some people, a belief in climate change threatens their belief in God. This is really important. If you really want to drive the point of what's really at stake here, and when you whip out that PowerPoint deck, if they're thinking, wait a minute, this is challenging my belief in God, you are talking right past each other. So the idea that we are so important that we can influence that environment out there, that's hubris. God's in charge out there, and we live by divine providence. I got heckled at a talk. Someone holding up a Bible saying, God promised Noah he would never flood the earth again. How can the seas be rising? Now, you can laugh at that if you wish, you can dismiss it if you wish, but that gives you a sense of the subtext, the depth of the subtext. And if you're going to try and convince someone that climate change is real and you're going against their religious beliefs, you understand the brick wall you are running full bore straight into. And that's where messengers can come forward. I think the most important part, I think there's many important parts of the Pope's encyclical letter, but if you read it, one of them, he does come right out and said, we have misinterpreted the Genesis mandate for centuries. And the idea that we can dominate nature has to be replaced with to keep and to till, to manage in partnership, not dominate. And that's where I start to go as I start to get into that territory. And then we have different conceptions of risk. What do? Well, we choose messages that are personally accessible. We find broker frames. So I can say that climate change is a threat to our national security. And there's a group called the CNA Group, a group of retired Army generals. They call climate change a threat multiplier. And it will destabilize regions, and the U.S. military will have to do more. We can say it's a threat to our economic competitiveness. Thomas Friedman's talking about this. We don't develop the technologies in renewable and solar. Germany and China will. We'll buy it from them. Is that what we want? No, we don't want that. You can frame it as an issue of risk management. Any of you have a house, you have fire insurance. The odds of the house burning down are low, the consequences would be high. Same with climate. Maybe the odds are low, something bad will happen, but if you're wrong, the consequences are high. Take out insurance. What's insurance? It's investment in technology and behavior change. The best frame that social scientists have found is the health frame, because it makes it personal. And that's one of the big challenges with climate change, is making it personal and salient. I can't see CO2, I can't feel global mean temperature going up, but if you can make it personal for me, I will start to care. Health can do that. If we have climate change, we have elevated temperatures in urban centers, it will hurt or even kill the vulnerable in our society. Who is the vulnerable? They're your grandparents and your children or grandchildren. And now you've made it personal. And there are events, Chicago, Paris, where people have died because of the elevated temperatures. This is real, and that makes it connect. So find those. I'm trying to be sensitive to time here. Recognize the power of language. Believe it or not, if you use climate change or global warming, depending on your audience, it will elicit a different response. If someone believes it's real, you can use the words interchangeably. If someone doesn't believe it's real, global warming gets them more fired up because it's easier to mock. That allows James Inhofe to walk into the floor of the US Senate in April and throw a snowball and say, how can global warming be happening? I'm holding a snowball in my hand. And so if you see an editorial mocking it, chances are you're going to see the words global warming. Think about that carefully as you go through it. The word green has become politicized. I can go to the whole dimension. Avoid cataclysmic scenarios. Avoid the day after tomorrow. And employ events as leverage for change. There's interesting surveys to show that if someone has experienced a flood, a drought, a forest fire, extreme nature, they're more likely to believe climate change is real because it starts to pick at their just world theory. It starts to pick at the idea that the world is always a nice place. It actually can turn on you, and it can get people to more accepting. Okay, what's the final form of distrust? Well, it's the solutions that come from the message. So, for example, we should have a carbon price or a trading scheme. Well, you just asked for an extremely intrusive government program. You're asking to enlarge the role of government in our lives. If you can't see the hot button issue you're touching on there. And then we need it on a global scale. So who should do it? Well, maybe the United Nations should do it. And now we've really hit a hot button issue. And so that starts to become a problem. We have different conceptions of the value of nature. Is nature there for our benefit, or does it have an inherent value? That cleaves our society in some very interesting ways. Should we protect Anwar? I'm guessing many people in this room might say yes. Will you ever go there? I'm willing to bet almost all of you would say no. You see value of it being left alone. There are other people saying, that is nonsense. There's oil. We need oil. Drill the frickin' oil. Why would you leave it alone? And so that comes down to a debate over, should we leave nature alone for its own sake? Or is it always there for our benefit? And that can go down to its roots in Genesis mandate. And then finally, trust in the market. People who have tremendous trust in the market to solve our problems typically don't believe climate change is real. What do you do about it? First of all, move beyond the negative. Too many people are focusing on, this is really bad, we got to do something to avoid the bad. The negative does not motivate people to act. and too many environmental messages are on the negative. There was an essay that came out a number of years ago called The Death of Environmentalism, saying that that's a problem with the environmental movement. It's always negative, and negative doesn't motivate people to reach beyond themselves. And they make it in a very humorous way to try and get it to connect with you. What's one of the most inspirational speeches of all time? It was by Martin Luther King. It was not called I Have a Nightmare, it was called I Have a Dream. That motivates people to reach for something more. So can you envision a world addressing climate change that's a better world? Yes, I can. It could be one that preserves the American way of life. It can be one that allows greater freedom and mobility with shared driverless cars, or green energy that doesn't create the pollution that, if you saw the cover of the New York Times today, that India is just getting covered in air pollution. Can you envision a better world? Because once you start framing this as purely sacrifice, people start shutting down. Okay? So that's what's on the table when you find yourself talking to that brother or sister, aunt or uncle, and they say climate change is not real. Don't whip out the PowerPoint deck. Go to where they are. As an example, I'm in a golf league here. And what I love about it, we play in courses all around the area, and no one else is an academic. I'm the only one. And it's plumbers and electricians and traveling salesmen. It's really, I enjoy that. And we never talk about work, ever. Until one day, I was in a league for 6 years, and I'm sitting on the trunk of my car, and I'm lacing up my shoes, and this guy, Greg, is on the trunk of his car, and he's lacing up his shoes, and he says, Andy, what do you do anyway, 6 years into the league? And I said, well, I'm a professor. He says, what do you teach? Business and environmental issues. He goes, like climate change? That's not real, is it? Now, what do you do? What do you do? I could start to give him a science lecture. He's going to feel about this big. I could talk about the ways we live unsustainable lifestyles, knowing that he's very proud of that Hemi under the hood, and he's very proud of that big house with a manicured lawn. He's worked hard to get it. That is a symbol of success in our society, and he has earned it. I could talk about the political divide between Republicans and Democrats, and for all I know, he's a Republican, and that's not going to go well. So I say, you know, there's a consensus within the scientific agencies, the national academies, says it's real. That's good enough for me, my answer. What's his next question? Andy, are you a Democrat or a Republican? So I say, well, I'm an independent. And he says, what do you think of Al Gore? And I say what I say in the book. I think he called attention to the issue, but perceptions of him caused it to become a politically polarizing issue. No. The conversation stopped. We played some golf. We talked about it more later. What was he doing when he was asking those questions? He's trying to figure out if he trusts me. He's trying to figure out if I'm part of his tribe. He's trying to figure out if I'm one of those enviro-Nazis who's going to start to judge him. And I didn't. I stood my position, but in no way challenged his, and we could have a dialogue. And that's key here. You have to overcome trust. That's the challenge. People will listen to people they trust. Okay, let me wrap up, as I promised, with a story to drive the point home, and then I'll take your questions. So I left my meeting with my climate skeptic potential donor who never gave us money. I would add, by the way, Earth Day is not on Karl Marx's birthday. It's actually on Lenin's birthday. He had his communists mixed up. And that is a very old idea that Earth Day was a communist plot to destabilize America. But I did what academics do. I started to build my thread of papers to try and move in this direction. So I wrote my first paper in a journal called Organizational Dynamics, and it's really just stretching my legs, taking what I know about culture, culture theory, institutional theory, and applying it to the issue of climate change to start to pull the pieces together to lay a theoretical base to start my work. I am sure you have never heard of the journal Organizational Dynamics, much less read it. It is just the beginning. I had two analogies in there that were really just throwaways, but I wanted to put them in because I like to use stories. I think stories are great ways to communicate issues. I think all of us as academics should be taught how to do storytelling. I think it's really what grabs people. Anyone who's a good speaker, they tell stories. And so the first one, cigarettes and human health, I talked about what it took for us to go from a scientific consensus to a social consensus. And I talked about the cultural shift that came with that. If you think about it, what's fascinating about that debate, a lot of people saying we can't do anything on climate change until we have that proverbial smoking gun, when scientists say, absolutely, 100%, without question, this is happening. We don't have that proverbial smoking gun on cigarettes. If you read the Surgeon General's report, it says, statistically, we'll show you how you can get cancer. Epidemiologically, we'll show it how it will happen. But quote unquote, in the end, it's a matter of judgment. I could do an experiment, ask you to all start smoking. Some of you will get cancer, some of you won't. I can't prove that cigarettes cause cancer. I can prove I can't prove that greenhouse gases cause climate change, but we still have a ban on cigarettes. We still have a social consensus that cigarettes are bad for you. We can do that on climate change too. And the cultural shift before us to make that jump. If you look back at the writings like the Cato Institute, they were apoplectic that the government would actually do this to the tobacco industry. This is a major shift of just banning a legitimate product from our society. How big is the cultural shift before us on climate change? And that's when I moved to my second analogy. It's as big as the abolition of slavery. And the point I made is that while you can't compare the emission of greenhouse gases to the cruelty of one race against the other, there are some interesting parallels. Abolitionists stood on the street corners of London and said we have to abolish slavery, and people said, you're out of your mind. You're going to ruin our quality of life. The entire economy is based on it, and that is true. The economy of the British Isles depended on slavery. In the time of slavery, people did not raise a moral issue around it until the abolitionists started to point it out. There's slaves in the Bible. It's part of our moral order. Can you imagine a day where we will look at the emission of CO2 with even remotely the kind of moral overtones we look at slavery? I'll bet you can't. And that's how big the cultural issue is before us, the cultural shift is before us. This is a major change. There were the throwaways. The paper came out. And then the New York Times picked it up, that abolition of slavery analogy. And then Scientific American picked it up, and Time Magazine picked it up. And I'm thinking this is cool. I'm a public intellectual. People are reading my work outside from this obscure journal into the pages of New York Times. And then someone sent me an email. And he said, I see Mark Morano is taking his hits at you. So I was new to this whole area. And I said, who's Mark Morano? And if you don't know, he used to work for Rush Limbaugh. He used to work for James Inhofe. And he has a web page called climatedepot.com. And my friend said, I really think you better go look at this page. So I went to the page, and this is what I found. And so here's my picture. Here's Adolf Hitler's picture. And there's the entire coverage of the article. Climate skeptics are the moral equivalent of those who oppose slavery. And there's my email address. And so the emails start coming in, and this is what they look like. And they're not very nice. They're not very friendly. And the bottom one is actually starting to get into the area of a threat. And it stunned me at first. I don't know how many of you have folders for hate mail. I now have one. It does come. And you know, as a social scientist, I was looking at what should I do with this? And I said, well, I should code it. And so that's what I started to do. And if you look, you'll see some underlying subtext to their questioning of science. First of all, they're skeptical of science and scientific elites. I'm a criminal. CO2 is plant food. Are you a moron? The days of milking the system with my phony science are numbered. I love this. You self-appointed overseers expect us peasants will take you and your fellow scientists seriously. You're a scientist, you're an elite, you live in the ivory tower, I don't trust you. A second frame, suspicion of my political ideology. I'm doing the work of Satan. I'm a green terrorist. I must be a secular evolutionist. If I believe in climate change, I must not believe in God. Rush Limbaugh devoted an entire episode of his show to saying you cannot believe in God and climate change at the same time. They're mutually exclusive. I'm an eco-imperialist. I'm a racist. Fear of economic disaster. Why do I want to lower the standard of living? Why do I want to develop the world? Greetings, comrade. Why do you want Marxist destruction of civilization? This is the subtext in all those emails, because you can stop and ask, why would someone send emails like that to someone they don't know over a scientific issue? It's because for them, it is not a scientific issue. They are defending values that they hold dear from attack, and they don't want to give them up. That is the conversation over climate change in this country right now. And if we recognize that subtext, we can do something about it. If we don't recognize that subtext, we will just continue to talk past each other. Thank you very much.
There are so many people in the world, billions, it needs to increase. Right? So we've got some upward momentum over here. If we want to modulate the upward momentum, then we have to do something.